You're listening to the Blues and Arts Hour on 103.9 WYAB, brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi and Small Town Music.
That dynamic gentleman of the blues, Mr. B.B. King!
Daniel De Vise is a dynamic biographer. He's written books on Andy Griffith, Don Knotts, has a brand new one out about the Blues Brothers, which we will talk about in just a few minutes, and there are some obvious Mississippi connections there. But he also wrote one a few years ago about one of Mississippi's greatest musical exports. The book is called King of the Blues, The Rise and Reign of B.B. King. And so the first half of our conversation with author Daniel De Vise here today on the Blues and Arts Hour will be about B.B. King. Is there anything unusual that you learned doing your research into B.B. King? Is there anything unusual that maybe people did not know about B.B. King that they will find out in this book?
You know, the thing that I maybe remember most clearly about B.B. King that came out when I was reporting it was, B.B. King had a lot of impulses that were related to kind of his parentage, his father and his mother. So his father, I would say his whole adult life, he was always trying to impress and maybe satisfy his father. His father was a very hardworking guy who was a tractor driver. He'd risen up to the top of the food chain in the sort of farming agrarian system in Mississippi. And so B.B. King was always trying to sort of, I think, impress his father that he was hardworking. And that's really important just in terms of, like, you'd put a Post-it up on your screen if you're writing a biography of someone, that's a basic essential quality to him. And he was always trying to kind of replace his mother, who died when he was young. And so he had, later in his life, just had, I think, women everywhere, all over the world, just myriad relationships. And in a sense, maybe some of them were sort of replacing his mother. He also had this huge family that he sort of assembled out of kind of spare parts, people who came forward saying he was their father. And he embraced parentage of every single one of them, more than a dozen over the years. And really reveled in having this large family. And I think it was replacing the family that he felt like he'd lost when he was a kid. So that's kind of the basic essential thing I feel like I discovered about B.B. King when I was researching his life.
Maybe you can answer this, because I have heard this in several places. Is it true that he said that none of the people who claimed to be his kids would get any kind of money from him unless they got a college education?
What I remember from writing the book was, at a certain point, there were all these people coming at him saying, I'm your kid, I want you to recognize me. And at a certain point late in his life, he sort of had a come to Jesus conversation with him and said, look, if you guys want to take a bunch of DNA tests, we can figure out for sure who's my kid and who isn't, and take it from there. Otherwise, let's calm down, all of us. And I do recall that when he died, that it was very, very important to him that his kids and grandkids at that point, because they were older, the kids were older, got an education. So I think what he bequeathed to his children, biological or otherwise, was geared toward educating their progeny. Absolutely, that was his priority, because he had only gone to school through, if I remember correctly, around maybe 10th grade. It's in the book. I documented this. I don't think he finished high school. Definitely didn't go to college. And I think that he felt that he'd been deprived, of an education.
He was a person of some refinement, nonetheless. You think about his favorite singer was Frank Sinatra. He was extremely well-spoken. Sometimes you couldn't even tell when he was talking that he came from the Mississippi Delta.
I would say most people I've written books about, he was a brilliant man. I mean, a genius. I think I've written weird books, but I've written about Andy Griffith, Don Knotts, I would say both of them were also brilliant people. People who get that famous as B.B. King, as famous as John Belushi, to talk about the blues, are brilliant and intensely ambitious people. And I think B.B. King was a very, very gifted, very brilliant, very ambitious guy. Oh, the other thing about B.B. King, that really the reason I wrote the book about B.B. King was I had a hunch that he was the man responsible for the solo guitar sound that sort of defined pop music in the latter, 30, 40 years of the century, all the way from your Carlos Santana, your Eric Clapton, your Jimi Hendrix, all the way to the end of the century when guitar kind of faded away from the center of things. That was B.B. King's sound. He had created that sound in, I think, 1949, 1950, way, way early. And over many years, his lyrical kind of vocal, like a human voice way of playing the guitar spread first to his acolytes, people like Buddy Guy and Otis Rush and Sun Seals, and then much later, and Albert King, and then much later to white guitarists, first in Britain, because they weren't as racist there, and then in the United States, and people like Bloomfield and, all the people who adopted his sound. And then by the end of the 1960s, thousands and thousands of lead guitarists were playing like B.B. King. And that was the other reason I wrote the book, was to document that, to sort of make that case.
Speaking of words that trouble people, you know I've had my share. Gonna pack my suitcase, move on down the line. Pack my suitcase, gonna move on down the line. You see, it ain't nobody worried, and then there ain't nobody crying. Every day, every day, every day, every day, every day, every day I have the blues. When you see me worried, people, it's you I hate to lose.
Coming up, the fruits of the many years on the road for B.B. King on the Blues and Arts Hour on 103.9 WYAB. You've got the Blues and Arts Hour on 103.9 WYAB, brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi and Small Town Music. And this week, a conversation with biographer Daniel De Vise, author of books about B.B. King and the Blues Brothers. I think about what you were saying, Carlos Santana Eric Clapton, in particular, had an affinity, I think, for B.B. King's blues licks, and he even made an album with him, kind of indicating on the album cover that he considered B.B. King at least one of his idols.
Well, okay, I spent 4 years on this book, and what I came away believing was this: B.B. King again created this sound. Basically, let me backtrack a bit. This is the sound of the human voice rendered in an instrument. There were people who learned how to do that in a violin. There were people like Louis Armstrong who figured out how to do it with the trumpet. B.B. King's innovation was that he brought that human voice sound to the guitar. And I could not find anybody before him who'd done it. There were lots of guitar players, but they didn't make the guitar sound like a human voice. So B.B. King did it sometime between 1949 and 1950. He developed the sound. He called it the butterfly. It was this sort of sound like a Hawaiian guitar, but lead electric guitar. And for years after that, it really, no one else played the way he did. But by the end of the 50s, you had a crop of black blues guitarists who played the way B.B. King did. And by the end of the 60s, you had an army of white guitarists, first in Britain and then in the States, who played that way. And the people who didn't know that was B.B. King's sound simply hadn't done their homework. They thought they were playing the way Albert King played. They thought they were playing the way Buddy Guy played. But if they'd talked to Albert King, or if they'd talked to Buddy Guy, they would have figured out that was in fact B.B. King's sound.
Yeah, he was the progenitor of that particular.
He was,
show.
yes. I mean, nobody, and the book's been out for a few years now. Nobody has contradicted me. Not one person.
As far as what you were talking about at the very beginning, and I do want to tease right here that we're going to get into the new book about the Blues Brothers. I think a lot of people around here, at least I did, and I think a lot of people around here did as teenagers, really dig that Blues Brothers movie, and then got into the music maybe from watching the movie or seeing old clips of Saturday Night Live. So I do want to tease right now that we're going to get into that here in just a minute. But I want to dwell for another minute or two on B.B. King, because I think he is so important here in Mississippi culture now. And at first, he was not in the 60s, maybe in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Even when he was having his hits, he was not quite as embraced by this state as he was when he got into his 80s and became kind of a cultural ambassador here and was so appropriately appreciated. But in his early days, and you mentioned something about this, he was always trying to impress, as a lot of people do, impress his father. Is it because maybe he thought guitar playing was not the kind of physical, productive, worthy work that his father was doing? Did that have something to do with it?
You know, I think, and again, I'm remembering back to stuff from 4, 5, 6 years ago, but what I recall is that his father, Albert King, not to be confused with the blues man, was a classic man's man, a provider, a hard worker. He worked tirelessly. He rose to the top of the food chain for black men, you know, in his station in Mississippi at the time. Was a tractor driver, you know, a top earner. And the great quote from Albert King was, you know, how can a man not work? You know, a man has to work. And so I think B.B. King spent his whole life, this is poignant, but trying to prove to his father, even after his death, that he could work just as hard as his father did. This is why B.B. King did like 300 shows a year and toured all over the world, 90 different countries. I mean, that was a slam dunk as far as a biography, like, you know, sort of defining who your character is, who your subject is in this biography. I mean, it was just crystal clear that B.B. King was just driven to the depth of his soul of trying to live up to his father's expectations, basically. I mean, you and I both probably did that to some extent, right? My father was a fairly accomplished guy and I wanted to impress him, but B.B. King really, really wanted to impress his father, his daddy, and doing the 19,000 concerts. I think that's what I figured out he did the most of anybody in popular music, was all about impressing his daddy.
What an incredible run that was. And when I think about the end of it, when he finally had to succumb to his inevitable weaknesses and get off the road, I think a lot of people didn't know, and I didn't know until he had played his last show, that he actually had Alzheimer's. And I didn't actually know that, I think, until the cause of death was released.
Well, if you go back and look at footage of his last few years of performing, he was in bad shape. I interviewed the people who were, his overseers at that point, and they told me that he would not leave the road. Again, this gets back to his fixation on wanting to work. He did not want to ever stop working, and so he kept working, kept playing way beyond when his mind could sort of handle it. He was reduced to where he would forget lyrics and play songs over and over again. And, in a way, it was all very sad, but the last few years, if you'd seen him live, it was pretty clear something was wrong. The only time I saw him live was, I think, maybe the biggest gig he ever did, at least in the States, which was the Chicago Blues Fest in '87. I saw him, from some distance, but it was pretty impressive. And that was when he was on top of his game. So like 95% of the people I ever spoke to who saw him live saw an amazing show. And then there were very few people I interviewed or spoke to who saw him at the very end. And that was sad, but that was what he wanted. He wanted to keep playing till the bitter end.
This is the end. I want you to tell my baby, tell her, please forgive me for my sins.
The book is called King of the Blues, The Rise and Reign of B.B. King by author Daniel De Vise. And coming up in just a minute, you'll hear from author Daniel De Vise about his new one, about something you may have grown up watching, listening to, and enjoying, the Blues Brothers. You're listening to the Blues and Arts Hour on 103.9 WYAB. You're listening to the Blues and Arts Hour on 103.9 WYAB, brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi and Small Town Music. I'm Chris Davis, your host. And this week you're hearing from biographer Daniel De Vise. His new book is on something that became kind of a phenomenon in the late 70s and early 80s, the Blues Brothers.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is showtime here at the fabulous Black Rhino Club, home of quality entertainment, home of the rhythm and blues. pleasure. Now, the club Black Rhino is proud to present direct from the statewide automobile tour of Illinois and Indiana, originally from Calumet City, Illinois. Let's put your hands together as they put your hands together to the blues band of Joni Etching and Elwood Blues. Put them together, yeah. The Blues Brothers, yeah.
I want to get to the Blues Brothers now because this is, of course, your latest work. And for people who don't know, what is the title of the book? And I'm assuming you can find it. I'm assuming you can find it in the usual places.
Yeah, the book is called The Blues Brothers, and that epic friendship, the rise of improv and the making of an American film classic. And anybody listening to this, if you want to support a good indie bookstore, you can get a signed copy, I think, for the list price at Acapella in Atlanta, or at Fountain Books in Richmond, or at Seminary Books in Chicago, or Boswell Books in Milwaukee, or at Politics and Prose in DC. All of those places have, or at least had, they're selling fast, but they all have had, I think they all have signed copies. And of course, you can also get it Square Books in Oxford, or thinking of where else, that wonderful place in Greenwood, Turnrow Books.
Yes.
Novel in Memphis.
There's been a lot of things that have come out about John Belushi after his death in the 40 years since he died. And a lot of people talk about the substance abuse. But what people maybe don't talk about as much is the level of enthusiasm that he embraced soul music, R&B. From what I have read, is that Dan Aykroyd actually got him into this stuff, and then he just went nuts with it.
Here's the history. Dan Aykroyd was from Ottawa, Canada, the capital of Canada, a long way from Jackson, Mississippi. I don't know if that's where you are. Where are you?
Yes, I'm in Jackson Metro.
Okay, remind me of that wonderful bookstore in Jackson.
Lemuria,
yes. They have the B.B. King book. They probably have the Blues Brothers book as well. Anyway, Aykroyd was huge into blues growing up because he was from an old family from Britain. His dad listened to like traditional jazz. So Aykroyd was into Sam and Dave. He sat in with effing Muddy Waters at a coffee house in Ottawa at one point, sat in and played the drums with Muddy for like probably 10 seconds. But so Dan Aykroyd was a huge blues hound. He learned to play the harmonica and the drums. And that's far from Mississippi, but the blues were never far from Dan Aykroyd's heart. So Belushi was another kind of cat. He was from the suburbs of Chicago, and it was initially into like the Led Zeppelin and that kind of stuff, and AC/DC and Joe Cocker. He had a great Joe Cocker impression. But when Belushi went to Oregon in the Pacific Northwest to make Animal House, that great movie, he played Bluto, right? And during that film shoot, he met a cat named Salgado, Curtis Salgado, who was the frontman of a blues band with an up-and-coming guitarist named Robert Cray. And so, listeners will know who Robert Cray is, right?
Yes. But I would assume so.
That was an ascendant band. And Belushi befriended Curtis Salgado, and Salgado got Belushi really into the blues. So when Belushi came back from that film shoot making Animal House, he was infected with the fever for the blues. And so Aykroyd was already a huge blues hound. So the two of them just poured their souls into blues. That was 1978. And by the end of 1978, Belushi and Aykroyd had sort of adopted these caricatures, these personas as Jake and Elwood Blues. And Belushi was so hot from making Animal House that there was going to be another Belushi movie. You know how that works in Hollywood. They're going to make another movie starring Clint Eastwood or whoever, and Belushi was hot. So they decided that movie was going to be the Blues Brothers. And so Jake and Elwood Blues became these film characters, and Aykroyd wrote a script. And that's where you get the movie that came out in 1980.
Now, I saw it said, I think it was George Carlin who said this, and it was quite a derogatory jab, I think, toward Dan Aykroyd. He said, overweight, middle-aged, balding white men are not blues men. Is that Is that true in what you learned writing this book?
Well, this is fascinating. Belushi and Aykroyd, the Blues Brothers, had a number one album at the close of 1978, fronting this all-star band featuring the Stax rhythm section, Steve Cropper and Donald Duck Dunn, Matt Guitar Murphy, a brilliant blues guitarist, and the SNL, Saturday Night Live horn section. They had a number one record, and Belushi had like the number one movie with Animal House and was just on top of the world. But this is real interesting. They caught some serious flack from like Rolling Stone. And I don't know if people remember the alternative press, like the Berkeley Barb in California and the Chicago Seed, these, like the Village Voice, these alternative papers wrote really, really harsh critiques, accusing them basically of racism, cultural appropriation, much as might be said now. What do you people think you're doing? Two white guys who are television comedians going and making a record singing black music. I mean, what the hell? What do you guys think you're doing? And it was a fair cop, but what Belushi and Aykroyd were doing, what they wanted to do, was to get people into rhythm and blues. I mean, if that's a sin, then they're sinners. But they wanted their white fans, who were many, who were manifold, to get into the rhythm and blues. They wanted people to go out and buy like Sam and Dave records, basically. I mean, that was their crime.
I guess it could be said too, if that is exploitation, then digging Mississippi John Hurt, up out of his house in Avalon, Mississippi, and taking him on tour when he was near the end of his life could be considered exploitation along the same lines.
Benevolent exploitation. When the movie came out, in 1980, there was another round of withering criticism saying this verges on racism, having these two clowns, these two white guys, Abbott and Costello, basically, in suits and black glasses, that almost like blackface, fronting this movie with the giants of rhythm and blues, Aretha Franklin, Ray Charles, James Brown, Cap Calloway, in sort of showcase parts, or you could say bit parts. Now, by the time the film came out, most people understood what was really happening, right? Which was that Belushi and Aykroyd and John Landis, the director, their mission from God, the real mission from God, the real purpose of the film, was to elevate the careers of those artists. That was why they made the film. I mean, that was the purpose to which they put the film once they had a film deal. They wanted to celebrate Aretha Franklin and James Brown, and that is what they did. That is what the movie is. It's them dancing around behind Aretha Franklin and Ray Charles and just celebrating their genius, basically. That's what the film is.
You're listening to the Blues and Arts Hour on 103.9 WYAB. You're listening to the Blues and Arts Hour on 103.9 WYAB, brought to you by Blue Cross, Blue Shield of Mississippi, and Small Town Music. I'm your host, Chris Davis, and this week you're hearing from author Daniel De Vise. one of the greatest parts of the recording of Soul Man is when John Belushi shouts out, "Play it, Steve," in the exact same spot in the Sam and Dave recording. He is talking to the exact same Steve. And that is just so awesome.
I think that something is lost if you go and listen to just the recordings of the Blues Brothers record. I mean, obviously it's an amazing band, but Belushi, to understand Belushi as a frontman in that band, you'd have had to see them, not just hear them. You'd have had to see them at the Universal Amphitheater or wherever they played in Memphis, because they did a gig in Memphis, or like Poplar Creek in Chicago, and see Belushi, because he was this wonder of nature, this freak of nature. He could get on stage and just command it and become a gravitational field unto himself. And all of the reviews of the Blues Brothers on tour were exultant reviews. He was an amazing frontman, even though he wasn't a great singer, but he's Belushi. I mean, he had people dancing in the aisles, and Aykroyd was a very enthusiastic sideman, and the band was amazing. So, and the point is, and this is the point. When I went and saw the Blues Brothers, which I saw at a theater called the Parkway in Chicago for probably $1 in like 1982, that was when I was probably 13 or something. When I saw that movie, I didn't go and buy the Blues Brothers record. You know what I went and did? I bought the best of Sam and Dave. Because I was like a little monkey see, monkey do.
It was on that 8-track that they were listening to.
Yeah, when that little 8-track. And I was like, I want to get that. So that's when I went and bought. And I think that's what the boys would have wanted,
And, I remember my cousin and I watching that movie for the first time, and it was probably 1994 when it came on TV. We saw the edited, watered-down version, but we watched it 15 times that week.
You better think about what's trying to do to me, yeah. Let your mind go, let yourself be free. Let's go back, let's go way on the back way. I didn't even know you couldn't have been too much more than I ain't no psychiatrist, I ain't no doctor with degrees. It don't take too much IQ to see what you're doing to me. You better think about what's trying to do to me. Ow, bang. Let your mind go, let yourself be free. Oh, freedom, freedom.
It's addictive, isn't it? And I had this argument with a couple people. It's not a pure comedy, and it's not as purely funny, laugh out loud funny as maybe Animal House or maybe Caddyshack. But if you put together the comedy, like how much for the women, how much for your women, the comedy, and just the action, the incredible set pieces with the cars getting destroyed and the Nazis flying off the bridge, and the music. It's an amazing film. I mean, I think it does more than those great comedies that are its kind of fellow travelers. It does more than those movies. It's a massive epic of a film. It's not just a comedy, and it's
a lot of satire.
Very, very funny, but it's not just funny.
I want to ask you this, because it's kind of a hot topic in the music world right now, and this may make the final cut, it may not, depending on what you think about this question. But there's a debate going on right now about Burton Cummings and the Guess Who, and those guys, the band that is performing those songs right now, having been stopped by a legal maneuver by Cummings. But the debate is, are these guys really the Guess Who? And I guess my question is, when John Belushi died, did the Blues Brothers die with him? Are the modern incarnations, are they the Blues Brothers?
Oh, boy, that's a loaded question. There's a Blues Brothers brand to this day. And at one point I had to decide with my book, I had the option was offered to me of making it like an official branded Blues Brothers book. And I didn't do it because I'm a journalist, basically. Yes. And I wanted to keep independence. And I think the book's probably better for that. But God bless him. I understand that a bunch of people went to Joliet prison a couple summers ago and saw Aykroyd and I think Jim Belushi doing the Blues Brothers, and they still got it and they can still do it. But it's not, of course, it's not the same. I mean, they would be the first guys to tell you it ain't the same. Belushi and Aykroyd, the original Blues Brothers, performed their last show at Poplar Creek, I think in Chicago, and it would have been around July or August of 1980, right after the movie came out. And that was it. And they didn't know it at the time, but that was the last time those two guys were going to perform together.
So I want to talk about very briefly where people can get the Andy Griffith and Don Knotts books, because I think so many people around here and everywhere grew up watching the Andy Griffith show, and these books are going to be probably something they'd want to add to their library.
Well, try Lemuria Books. They might have it. If they don't, Andy and Don, that's my bestseller. It's in like its 13th hard paperback printing. And Andy and Don, in terms of the DNA, Andy and Don is the most similar to the Blues Brothers. I wrote them kind of the same way. I followed a similar formula with both those books. So with the Andy and Don, it's Andy Griffith and Don Knotts and their story, and then the Andy Griffith Show. And that book went just crazy when it went bananas. And the Blues Brothers, thank God, is selling really well too. And that's Belushi and Aykroyd and their greatest work as a duo, which is the Blues Brothers film. And yeah, they're not hard to find. You just got to Google them. But I would encourage, if someone's listening to this and they're in Jackson, they should go to Lemuria. It's an amazing store. I did a book talk there a few years ago. It was awesome.
Hey, I appreciate the fact that you're all up about independent sellers. That is cool.
Oh, yeah. Spend the extra $5 for goodness sake. Go to Lemuria, buy it there. If they don't have it, let them order it for you.
We're so glad to see so many of you lovely people here tonight, and we would especially like to welcome all the representatives of Illinois' law enforcement community who have chosen to join us here in the Palace Hotel ballroom at this time. We do sincerely hope you all enjoy the show, and please remember, people, that no matter who you are and what you do to live, thrive, and survive, there are still some things that make us all the same. You, me, them, everybody.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time. This has been enlightening.
Well, thank you for touting 3 of my books. Andy and Don, the B.B. King biography, which is big and thick, and it's a doorstop. And then the Blues Brothers, the new one, which, thank goodness, is selling like hotcakes. I'm so grateful.
You've been listening to the Blues and Arts Hour on 103.9 WYAB. It's brought to you every week by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi and Small Town Music. I want to thank again biographer Daniel De Vise. Be sure to tune in next week right here at the same time on 103.9 WYAB.